8 years after disappointing launch, today No Man's Sky releases Worlds Part 1 update, and the developer Hello Games announcing their next game, Light No Fire, somewhat soonish. The sentiment in this time has turned around completely for both the company as well as for the game. So, as a little stroll down the memory lane, we could take a look at the original 2016 initial release. And how does it compare to the game we got today? How much things have changed? Oh, and also, take a look at the subscribe button. Yes, subscribing helps. Ah, and look at that, now it glows too. Well, yes, that's a kind of a new feature for YouTube, kind of. For the first time when I say it in the video, it lights up. Ooh, so maybe poke it. But no, seriously though, let's jump in.
Commencing Atlas system suit initialization.
So then, the game starts. In the original 2016 release, no main menu options, no nothing, just boom, straight into the initialization screen. This intro scene is basically unchanged, as your character slowly and pretentiously spins around looking at things as things come into view. Ooh, it's just as annoying as it ever was. As you open options menu to change graphical settings, oh god, it's barely improved. Now sure, today there is no longer the consolitis, press and hold to do an action thing, and the game has moved from OpenGL to Vulkan graphics API, but oh god, I can still feel the consolitis. It utterly disgusts me. However, longtime players will notice that in the old version, you get your ship straight away. See, rather, I guess soon after the release, Hello Games changed the opening of the game to include your character just starting in a random location without a ship, where you had to fix yourself up before you can get the fartmobile going. But other than that, there's not much change. You basically gotta get your ship fixed to lift off. Now, the most notable change, of course, will be the graphics. Now, back in 2016, No Man's Sky was a lot more, unbearable. God, what were Hello Games actually thinking with this color palette? Now, today though, color palette is a bit more subdued, going from eye searing to maybe just mild eye bleaching. And yet the hardcore space dazzles still whine like little girls that this color waterboarding offends their space fifis. Now, the next thing you most certainly will notice is the different mineable rocks, and definitely their names. Back then, the game also generated metallic-looking terrain protrusions, ground directions if you will, that hosted resources that you might need. Now, what you didn't need was terrain manipulator, because, well, there wasn't any, to dig them up. Now, the ground still was voxel generated, and to a certain extent, even in 2016, it was a technical marvel. Though it wasn't exactly the first game with this sort of a feature. Come to think of it, space engineers come to mind the most. Today, though, changes to materials and how we mine them gradually came over several updates, but the first steps came relatively quickly, come to think of it. However, one thing that No Man's Sky, even back in the day, did better than everyone else was generating shit to actually do on planets. Yes, it was mostly repetitive, but it wasn't exactly the most blandest thing out there, like space engineers, or worse, really dangerous. Even though No Man's Sky planets are super homogenized, meaning that, well, no matter where you go, biomes, well, they don't really change. Well, especially when you compare it to something like Minecraft or Terraria. It's definitely a far cry. But even with that level of homogeny that No Man's Sky offers, it always offers something to mine and gather wherever you go, and making that part of the grind at least somewhat mildly fun, even if you start seeing the patterns in it. But if there's one thing I definitely don't miss, it's the fucking Sentinels. Jesus fucking Christ, they were super annoying. Until, honestly, just recently, about 2 years ago or so, Sentinels were utter pain in the ass, annoyance, constantly harassing you. But now, well, at the very least, you can kinda prevent them from spawning, at least for a while. Now, speaking of annoyances, back in the day you also had to manually refill your energy in your multi-tool, ship, and your suit. Whereas few years later, quick menu was added, providing a lot easier and faster way to top off the charges, and do a few other things. Now, this also meant that, let's say, if you walked far away from your ship, well, guess what, fucker? You're trekking your ass back to it. No shortcuts there. And speaking of indie pretentious bullshit and annoyances, well, the milestone letterboxing effect. That wasn't skippable back then. Oh god, please, no. Well, on the bright side, today you can skip it, but oh, it still exists and oh no, I don't like it at all. I mean, the good old saying applies here. When everything is special, nothing is. Now, when I talk about space sim games, especially the true space sim games, and exploration especially, well, I do praise No Man's Sky for helping establish exploration as the third key gameplay, along with Elite Dangerous. However, the very first scanner, oh, it was first of all automatic, and very shit. And then there were animals. And now, actually come to think of it, yeah, they're still pretty spore-like evolutionary miscarriage looking like, but at least they're not quite that bad. Plus there are some more extra interesting types, so it's not all bad. Now, as we go into the space, even back in the day, No Man's Sky, while not being the first game, even after the post-2012 Space Sim Golden Age resurgence to offer seamless transition between planetside and space, it's still to this day one of the very few, barely handful games that actually accomplished this technological marvel. Starfield! No, I'm serious, the first game to actually accomplish this sort of a feat was Elite 2 in the late 90s, and then for about a solid decade, until Kerbal 1 and Space Engineers and later down the line Elite Dangerous, well, there really were no games to accomplish that sort of a feature at all. Now today, this really hasn't changed much. Yeah, the transition is a bit faster than it used to be, but more adjustments you'll see in visuals, and of course planets and the space itself. And most notably, I would like to emphasize No Man's Sky's best looking clouds of any of the space games out there. And yes, I'm looking at you, Star Citizen, as well! Either shit or get off the pot and release something! Until then, I'm not counting you! Yup, whether it was the first release or even today, the game still plays the stupid annoying indie rock crap the first time you enter a starport. Gods, I can smell the hipsterness from here. However, if we take a look at the ships that are flying in, well, on the first release they did fly in, but the difference was that NPCs would not spawn, and you would have to interact with the ship itself. In fact, today the lobby room looks completely different. In fact, there are a couple of different starports themselves. And NPCs are not just standing or sitting around, they're actually moving too. And come to think of it, going back to the original version, it's more apparent that, well, No Man's Sky barely has any physics in it. Sure, there are some ragdoll moving physics on the ground, but that's all you're gonna get from the physics objects. The game tries to limit them as much as possible, and that is still true today. Now, as for the space combat, well, it was arcadey as fuck and not very good at that. Today though, it's more spectacular with more things happening, but it's still pretty bad. Seriously, go play any semi-serious space combat game and you'll know what I mean. But hey, Hello Games tried, and I guess we can give them credit for that. And then comes the Space Anomaly. Now originally this was a stopgap where you would find nada. This was just a place where you would get your first multi-tool, at least story-wise, and some story pieces, but not much more. Ever since Beyond update, after multiplayer was introduced in the next update, now the Anomaly serves as the Nexus to connect other players and worlds, and host bunch of blueprints, selling machines and NPCs and whatnot else. It truly has expanded to no end. Now, speaking of technologies and upgrades, now back in the day, of course, you would still upgrade your gear, like your multi-tool and your suit and spaceship, but the way you would acquire these upgrades was quite a bit different. Instead, like today, you are buying them off of technology brokers, you would find these technologies and upgrades in broken machinery on planet surfaces or those wall-mounted technology outlets, whatever they were called. Now, obviously today the tech and variety of it is a lot more forgiving and varied, but I gotta say, I kinda miss the old tech hunting on planet surfaces a bit. Now, once you start jumping between systems, you'll notice that, well, it's not really that different. Except for the fact that there is no third-person mode. And frankly speaking, I don't like it, but, you know, hey, to each its own, I guess. Now, you'll also notice that today we have refiners that allow us to dupe items. Oh, and also sometimes refine something. How could I forget? And of course that also leads us to crafting and most importantly to base building, which was introduced, actually surprisingly, both relatively early. And now come to think of it, I might be wrong on this one, but I think the base building update was the first really good update for No Man's Sky after the big, shitfest of the launch. Over the years, the game also received several gameplay altering modes like hardcore and creative. Today you can even change the difficulty on the fly, culminating in Expeditions update with Expeditions. Those are basically limited time, cool and unique playthroughs with different objectives than normal. But as for the story, well, it still sucks ass with squawking NPCs and text box dialogues, basically. And that hasn't changed much. But back in the day you only had Atlas Path, or you could just straight go for the center of the galaxy. Either which way, it's basically the same thing. But today not only you have multiple quest lines, but you also have a Questlog. And I'm probably forgetting something. Oh right, yeah, you can pick up missions too. And so, since we're talking about the story, well, there was one thing that cheesed off everyone a lot on the first release of the game. And that's that the center of the galaxy was a fucking reset button. And today, it hasn't changed. It's just that you get there in different ways, with, more things happening between, but it's still there. Now, say what you will. Yes, the reset button is a nice to have feature at the, the end game, but was it necessary to have it as the quote-unquote ending of the story? I mean, what kind of a cheap cop-out move was that, huh? But there you go. Overall, I could mention a bunch of other changes, some greater, some smaller, but playing the old version today, oh boy, yeah, the quality of life improvements can be felt a lot. Graphical changes even more so, and hell, even some of the features like, like the duplication. Refiners are sorely missed and glad to have them today. Now, if you have a chance, go download the very first version. I'll link down below a guide how to do it, legally, and try your hand on the very first version of No Man's Sky. Honestly, the game has changed far more than even I thought, and I've played it since it came out, so my memory is not that good. Oh no. But that aside, the usual stuff. Come support my work on Patreon, every bit really helps this horsehead, and maybe, hey, come join the Discords too. As for now, I'll go check out what the expedition has to offer. Well, if there is one. Damn it, I want to replay some of them.